The second issue we are going to discuss is the relationship between the federal government and the states. More specifically, in this under this topic, what we are going to discuss is what powers can be exercised by the federal government and what powers should be reserved to the states. It is in the structure of the Constitution, it is very important we understand this concept. That is, the federal government is a government of limited powers. Even though we all tend to think the federal government is a very powerful government, that understanding is not wrong. The federal government indeed is a powerful government, but in the structure of the Constitution, we must understand the federal government is a government of limited powers. Why do we say the federal government is a government of limited powers? Because the federal government may only exercise the powers enumerated in the Constitution. It is also very important for us to remember whatever the powers that are not enumerated in the Constitution are reserved to the states. Just to have a very quick historical note, we know when this United States, when this union was first founded, and these 13 colonies, and they had this concern. They were concerned if there was a federal government and the federal government could take powers away from the states. So to address that concern, in the Constitution, it is written very specifically what powers that can be exercised by the federal government. So those are the enumerated powers. And then there is also a provision in the Constitution stating the powers that are not enumerated in the Constitution are reserved to the states. So now we understand the issue is still what powers can be exercised by the federal government and what powers should be reserved to the states. Now let's look at these powers enumerated in the Constitution. If you look at this list, and then actually the powers are not that many. The first one is the power to maintain a military force. The second one is to conduct foreign relations. The third one is naturalization. And then we have this power to regulate interstate commerce and foreign commerce. And then we have this power to issue the U.S. currency. And then we have this power to establish post offices and to establish federal courts. The federal government, of course, also has the power to collect taxes. Why it is important for us to discuss these enumerated powers? We know oftentimes the federal government would pass federal law. The federal government would intend to do something. But it is very important if the federal government wants to pass the law or whatever action this federal government intends to take, it must come to this list of enumerated powers and point out under which enumerated powers the federal government can pass this law or can engage in this action. So that's why this discussion of enumerated powers is important. That's why this what powers can be exercised by the federal government and what powers should not be exercised by the federal government becomes a very important constitutional issue. Now let's look at some specific examples. according to the Constitution, the powers not enumerated in the Constitution are reserved to the states. Now let's look at this issue, and then can the federal government pass a law concerning school curricula? Can the federal government to say local school, all the schools in the nation must teach certain subjects and or how the subjects should be taught? Can the federal government pass a law of this nature? Okay, so in general, maybe a straightforward answer to the question is no. Why? The answer is no, because if you look at these enumerated powers to maintain a military force and conduct foreign relations, so on and so forth, and then probably it's difficult for you to find under which power the federal government would be able to regulate this school education. So that is really the basic framework of the analysis. If the federal government wants to pass a law, it must come to this list of enumerated powers and point out under which power it can pass this law. So for this law concerning school curricula, maybe it is difficult for us to find under which enumerated powers the government can do this. All right? An argument probably can be made. The federal government can do this under this power to regulate interstate commerce. We are going to discuss this issue later on, but for now, we just say if we have this straightforward understanding of these enumerated powers, maybe we have to say the federal government cannot pass a law concerning school curricula. A very important concept we also need to know is in these enumerated powers, we do not have a general police power. We did not see that. Okay, but even though that is the case, we also understand we do have federal crimes. So we need to understand how these federal crimes are created. Basically, federal crimes can be created in two ways. One is if we have these federal interests implicated, and then that conduct can become federal crime. We understand, according to this enumerated, according to this list of these enumerated powers, federal government can establish post offices. So if someone would go there to vandalize the post office, or if someone would go to the post office to assault a postal worker, would that be a federal crime? Of course, that will be a federal crime because in this case, federal interests are implicated. If the federal government has the power to establish post offices, and then the post offices, we must make sure the post offices could operate. If someone would go there to vandalize the post office or to assault postal workers, and then this post office could not operate. So in that sense, federal interests are implicated, so those conduct can become a federal crime. Another way to create federal crime is through this power to regulate interstate commerce. If a person is engaged in this drug dealing, say if a person is selling drugs on the New York City street, that cannot be a federal crime. That can only be a state crime. However, if a person would go to Florida to buy drugs over there and then bring drugs back to New York City streets, and then the person would sell the drugs, and then that will be a federal crime because the commission of this crime implicates interstate commerce. It is not difficult for us to come to the conclusion a person's conduct actually implicate interstate commerce. For this person, if this person went to Florida to buy drugs, and then the person came back to New York City and then to sell the drugs, and then the person had to have a way of transportation. the person would buy an airplane ticket, would buy a train ticket, that is commerce. That is commerce. That is interstate commerce. And also this train and also this airplane would cross the state borders. And then we know that is interstate commerce. So this drug transaction across state borders would be a federal crime. So just remember, if a crime is committed locally, the crime would not be a federal crime. But if a crime is committed crossing the state border, right away, that crime will become a federal crime. So that is another way these federal crimes could be created. There is another important issue, that is Constitution in general regulates the conduct of a government. The Constitution in general would not reach private conduct. So only the government, in general, only the government can violate the Constitution. A private individual, a private enterprise, in general, cannot violate someone's constitutional right. For example, to look at these two examples, and if we have this, if suppose and you do not have this very good relationship with your neighbor does not like you, so one day your neighbor just drag you down to his basement and lock you up over there for 2 days, and then the question is, we know according to Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, you have this protection, we have this protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. If your neighbor would lock you down in his basement for 2 days, that is an illegal seizure. But the issue is, did your neighbor violate your constitutional right? The answer is no, because your neighbor is not a state actor. Your neighbor is not a government agent. So your neighbor cannot violate your constitutional right. Your neighbor's conduct is criminal, it's illegal, it is in violation of the state criminal law. But the action would not be in violation of the Constitution, because only the government, only a state actor can violate someone's constitutional rights. And also, suppose one day you go to a department store and then on your way out, you are being detained by the store's security guards. And then these security guards just wrongfully accuse you of committing shoplifting and then detain you maybe for half a day. The same question. Did these security guards from the department store violate your constitutional rights? The answer is also no, because the security guards of a department store, they are not a state actor, so they cannot violate someone's constitutional right. But if you are being detained by the police illegally, and then did the police violate your constitutional right? The answer is yes, because the police are state actors. So a state actor, if detained you illegally, there will be a violation of your constitutional right by the police. But if this action actually is taken by your neighbor or by the security guards of a department store, there would not be the issue of a violation of your constitutional right. So it is important for you to remember this concept of a state actor. Only the state actor may violate someone's constitutional right.